Hi everyone, welcome back to our fourth video on the banking CLI application. Okay, so in our previous class we were setting up the our database helpers, so we can mark this as done. Okay, so what we did was we created a database helper class that would aid us to get an instance of a PD object which we can use to communicate with our database, right? And we did some examples just to make sure it's working. So this time in this video we're going to define our data model and entities. Okay, so first we have our records here. So we have two tables, accounts and transactions. So this, we already have a database representation of these entities. Okay, so we have them mapped to tables in our database, but we can't work directly with SQL in our application layer. Okay, since we're writing in PHP, we want to work with PHP. So what we're going to do is we're going to represent this entity, okay, in PHP as a class. Okay, different languages have different data structures you can use to represent your data. You could even use an array, okay, an associative array in PHP, but that doesn't give us the flexibility we need, which we would get if we use classes, right? So so yeah, we're going to create um, classes that represent these database entities in PHP. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to create a class. We'll start with account. So we're going to create a class called account. Okay, so for account, we're going to have a few um, properties. So we can make them public or private. I'm going to go with private properties, and we're going to have getters, public getters to represent these, to give access to properties, okay, of these classes. So the property itself are going to be private, then we'll expose getters to make them available read only. So we don't want any external API to be able to write directly to these classes. We'll see the advantage of this as we go. So we're going to start with so I'm going to make use of types when necessary. Now types might not be available in every version of PHP. I think we have types from was it 8.2 or 8.3, okay, property types, where you can say, okay, properties of this type. Usually maybe from PHP 8.0 down, we don't have that feature. I think from 7 point something, I'm not really sure, okay, but I think I have to look that up. Yeah, but I know I've been using them for as long as possible. I always try to stay up to date with PHP. And also, maybe I should have mentioned this, currently we use let's see, what do we use, let's check the version. So I use currently is 8.3, so any feature that I'm using here would be 8.3. okay, so make sure to be on the make sure to have PHP 8.3 or above. Okay, right, so we have ID, which is a string, so we're going to make it string. Going to say ID, going to create one for let's say username, password, hash. So let's say username, password, hash. Now I'm going to use camel case standard or convention for property names. So private string, what other properties do we have? So we have full name, we have balance. So full name, let's do full name. Now for amount, we could use a double or a float. Okay, so anyone would work. So let's do double. Let's see, amount, right? Oh, balance, sorry, balance. And then let's do account number and pin hash. So private, I think we could use a float. I'm not sure we are going to have a lot of values for, or a lot of the size of our balance would not be too large. We won't have like very large balances, so float will be enough for that, but ideally you'd want to use a double. So let's go with yeah, so we have pin hash, right? So let's do pin hash. So what do we have? Okay, we have date, time. So now for date, we could use strings to represent the date, or we could use a datetime object. So PHP has a datetime object that we can use, okay, to represent the date. So you can either use the datetime or the datetime immutable. Okay, I prefer the datetime immutable, so let's use that. Now you might wonder, why am I using this backslash here? So this class is among the would I say the it's included in the standard library for PHP, so we have to in the root namespace, so we'll have to use this slash to import it. Okay, so however you could do something like this. Use I think use, is it use or using? Yeah, use. So you can do something like use datetime immutable, yeah, and once we do this, we don't have to include this anymore. Yeah, so we can do this as well. Right, let's just try to run this to make sure everything is fine. So I'm going to do cd me learning banking CLI. So let's do PHP main. Okay, let's see. Okay, sorry, this is banking CLI. Yeah, PHP main dot PHP. Okay, so we have use statement with not compounding has no effect. Sorry, not use. This would be, yeah, this would be used, I think. Immutable, right? So let's see what happens when we comment this. Okay, I think we don't even need to do that. Okay, yeah, so this would be valid if we have a namespace set up. Currently we don't have that, so it's actually unnecessary. Yeah, my bad. Alright, so we'll create getters for this public properties. So we're going to do function get id, and this is just going to return this id, right? Okay, so we're going to do that for username. So we're going to say get username, which would return this username. Now to make things easy, we could have just gone for public properties and make them writable, but then they might cause issues at the long run. And if you're using an IDE, there are actually ways to generate this automatically so that you don't have to stress yourself, right? And it will also reduce the chances of making mistakes as well. So let's say get full name, let's return this full name, right? Then function get balance. So I will be sharing the code, so maybe you can, I'll prefer you type this instead of copying and pasting, okay, so that you would get used to it. So now you might be asking, why am I not specifying the return type? Okay, this is something you can choose to do, but it's good practice to actually specify what your function is returning, the type, so that you are sure of what's coming from the function. Okay, and of course it also helps to make sure you fulfill your contract. So you're saying in this function it will return this at the end. Okay, so PHP would ensure that you're actually returning that thing you said you're supposed to return. Okay, so let's do for last modified at, which represents when the record was last modified at. Beautiful. Right, so this would represent our account. Now we can do the same thing for our transaction. So we say transaction. So for transaction we have, let's see, we have ID, we have amount, we have status. Okay, so let's see, private string ID, private string amount. Okay, amount, let's use float. Then private string. Just to confirm, does PHP really have double? Let me see. Yeah, so we actually don't have double in PHP. I know most, I think we have a class that represents double, but we don't have double as a standard type in PHP. Yeah, so let's maintain float for now. Okay, so floats, so we have status, right? So status. Now we could use an enum to represent the status. Maybe we could update this after we are done with the features, to use an enum. Okay, for better type safety, but for now we're going to leave it as string. So we have created that, we have last modified at. So let's do that. So let's do datetime immutable. Let's do created at. So I like to put the date, especially the timestamp fields, like created at and like modified at the end. So I think I'll bring the last two forward, beneficiary account ID and beneficiary account, sender account ID. So say beneficiary account ID. I think maybe the sender should be first. So let's take this up. here. Right, that's good. Then we'll create our getters and setters. Okay, so let's say get ID, return this ID, public function, get amount, this will return the amount as a float. So we'll have status, so get status, return this status. Going to have our sender ID, so get sender account ID. So we're going to return this sender account ID. Also going to return the beneficiary account ID. So beneficiary account ID. Return this beneficiary account ID. Right. Then we're going to return our date. So we created at, and the record was created. So this would be created at, then our last modify that. Last modified at. Right. Last modified at. Right, so with this we have created classes that represent database entities. So we have a class for account and we have a class for transactions. Okay, so what I'm also going to do, going to create some mapper functions to help us quickly take what we have from our database and map it to what we have in PHP. Okay, so we're going to be returning, when fetching data from our tables, we're going to return them as an associative array, and then we're going to map the associative array to what we have in PHP. So let's do that for account, right? So for account, we can see public function. So we're going to make it static so that we don't have to create an instance of this class to get it. So say public static function map, let's see, map, what do we call it? Let's say map to entity. Yeah, let's call it that, map to entity. So maybe we could call this account entity. I could call this transaction entity. Different conventions. Okay, call it entity, could call it model. Okay, it's up to your record. Okay, so I'm going to call it account entity. So say map to entity, and here we're expecting an array. This would be an associative array. So we'll say array, and let's call this record, right? And we could type this and say we're expecting an account entity to be returned at the end of this code base. So so first we create an instance of this class, so we can see what do we call this? Okay, let's call it account equals to new account entity, right? Okay, and then we can start assigning things So because we are within the class, we have access to the properties. We don't have to create a setter for that. So we can say id equals to record. Then so in our database, we have we need to map the columns to the properties in PHP. Okay, so because we named it id, we have to use it like that, because we're going to use associative arrays to and we'll tell the PDO instance to map the columns um, to the column headers to keys that we can use to refer to those records in the DB. Yeah, or to refer to those columns in the DB. Sorry. So let's do account. Let's see username. Say record. Then username. Now you might also want to confirm that you actually have these keys available. Okay. So let's say username, we have password hash, which will be record. If you remember, we have pin. Now pin is not null. We created a rule that pin can be nullable, right? And when we're creating our record, we made it nullable. So if we do this, we must provide a pin. We don't want to do that. So we could make this nullable, and we could default it to null here, or we could do it here. Okay, so let's do, because it could be null. So let's say password hash. Let's do that. Then we have full name, so we'll say account full name equals to record full name. And we can say account balance, which will be record balance, right? It's account pin hash, which will be record pin hash. Now if there isn't anything in there, then we could default it to null. So for this, now for our date time fields, yeah, so what's going to be coming from PHP is going to be in form of a string. Okay, so we need a way to convert it in a format that works. We need a way to convert it to a date time object. So in order to do that, we just need to say new date time immutable, which is a class on its own, then followed by what's coming from our DB, so which would be created at, right? So with that, we have our object, and we could do something similar for our last updated at record last modified at. So this is last modified at. So with this, we have our object, and we could just return the object back to the caller, and with this we have our records, or we'll have a representation of the record in our DB as an instance of account entity. Yeah, so we could do something similar for transaction entity. Okay, so I'll leave that as an assignment for you guys. So what you can do is you just create a public static method. Okay, you could call it map to entity. It's going to take an array. It's going to return a transaction entity, and then you can create an instance of this class. Then you populate with the right columns, populate the properties with, we can see data from the right columns, or from the respective columns, or appropriate columns, from the just appropriate columns, and then we return the instance. So we just need to do that. Okay, so we could try testing this, right? Could try testing this. So maybe we could do for account entity. Let's see if we have some records in our account table. So let's do accounts, suit accounts, we call it. Let's do that. Okay, we have some records, so let's see if that works. So let's try to create a PDO instance, and then we need to create a query out of this. So we're going to do statements. This will prepare a statement object for us, and then we can execute queries on this statement object. So I could also add some options which we can add. So one of the options would be, what would they be called? Attribute cursor, and we can give that PDO cursor, I think forward only, something like that. So this would ensure that records, when we fetch records, we can only go forward. We can't scroll back. We can't, once we read a record, we must keep going forward. We can't go back. We can't take the cursor back to read a previous record. So basically that's what it does. So it makes it efficient for read operations. So with that, we can execute the fetch operation. So we could say while row equals statement fetch. So for fetch, we can see the fetch type. Let's do PDO fetch assoc. This will get our records as an associative array, which will be useful for our mapper functions here. So with that, we can iterate over the while loop. So let's see, maybe we could do an echo just to confirm our records are coming. So we'll say row followed by the ID. We'll just print the ID and then just PHP URL, right? So let's see what happens when we do this. Alright. Okay, so we have this 55, line 55, where's that? 55. Okay, that's here. Yes. Right. Okay, echo. Let's see. Expected token online. Okay, yes. So we didn't end this. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Alright. So database connection. Create a new one. Then existing database connection found, and then we have this, right? So let's see, Let's see, do we have, oh yeah, sorry, we haven't executed our statement, so that's why it's empty. So let's do that. So let's do statement execute, right? So with that, this executes the statement. So with this statement will be executed, and then when we call fetch, this will fetch our records for us. So let's run it again. Yes, so we have the IDs for the first two records in our DB. So let's map these records from the DB to PHP objects that we can use on our application. So let's do that. So let's do account equals account entity colon colon. So there's a static method. So say map to entity, and then we can pass this row object into it. So with that we'll get an account, and we could do the echo just to confirm. So maybe we print maybe the ID, right? So we can see account get ID, right? But we might not be able to do this because of it will tell us that only simple expressions are allowed for this. But let's just go ahead. Yeah, so let's do account get full name. So we're calling the getters because we don't have access to the private properties. Let's do an URL. Okay, so let's see what happens. But yeah, we're able to get the value. Yeah, okay, yeah, so this works because it's a getter. Okay, but there are situations where you might not be able to do this. Maybe if the method contains a lot more code before generating the value, it might prompt you that only simple expressions are allowed, but for getters it's usually fine. Yeah, so with this you can see that we are able to successfully map our database records, okay, to our account entity, which we can use. So we are familiar with this. So with this gives us ease to work with our records in the PHP userland instead of having to work with the rules themselves and have to pass. Okay, let's say we need to get the full name, we'll have to do something like row full name, and there will be no IntelliSense if we're using VS Code or IntelliJ or Sublime Text. There will be no suggestion that okay, full name exists. But if we are using the classes, okay, the code editor already knows that this methods exists in the class. So the moment you start using this, okay, it gives you suggestions on methods that could exist in this in the class, right? All right then, so this will be all for this episode. So in the next episode we're going to create database helpers, or data access helpers rather, okay, that will help us get data from our database, and also maybe help us update data back into the database. Okay, so see you in the next one.